Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of our Patagonia to Alaska cycle trip, and thanks for following our updates. The past few weeks we've been cycling from Mendoza, the largest city we've so far visited, known mainly for its wine, and also its proximity to Aconcagua, the highest peak in the southern hemisphere. We've been riding to Cafayate, another wine town set in the foothills of the Andes, and after 3.5 months of riding we've now covered just over 5,000 kilometres. We're now 500 kilometres from the border to Bolivia. This last section has been super fun, and we've been humbled by the changeable weather that we've been told is actually uncommon for this time of year. We've also been joined by a new friend, Mike. We originally met further south at a wild camp spot where Phoebe broke her ankle, and a month later our plans are now aligned and we've been travelling together. Mike, having cycled northern Argentina 5 or so years ago, enjoyed it so much he's been retracing his steps, this time from south to north, heading to Bolivia, and then planning to head back home to Holland afterwards. It's been really useful to get insider tips on upcoming sections of the road, what not to miss, as well as having an absolute grown-up child to muck around with. Before we could start cycling properly, however, we had to renew our visas as we approached our limit of 90 days in Argentina under the tourist visa. This turned out to be a really arduous process. It took us over a day to get the required paperwork, so I think next time we'll be taking the fine at the border to avoid this insane bureaucracy that rivals the sloths in Perranporth post office. What do you reckon, Mike?
But I reckon I think it's shit. I think it's all bollocks. It's bureaucracy. It's a waste of time. It's suppression from the state. I mean, they're all a bunch of basically.
It's amazing, eh?
The same day, we headed out on a pretty remote section of road, meaning we had to pack a few days' worth of food and extra water for the hot climb out of the city. We set up camp in an abandoned building on the side of the road that looked absolutely perfect. But as we were eating our dinner, we noticed lightning in the distance. We then noticed a few minutes later a wall of sand about 6 foot high that was slowly approaching us a few kilometres away. Obviously, knowing us, it had to take the storm to actually hit us before we got our act together to try and fasten down our tents as best as possible and tidy up our cooking gear that was now flying around the building. We couldn't quite believe how strong the wind was. We had 4 walls around us that normally should have provided adequate shelter. And also the building's drainage wasn't up to scratch either. And the centimetres of water that are now gathered on the floor were starting to infiltrate our tents. I ended up having to spend the evening reading my Kindle in my chair inside my tent while the tent floor dried underneath me. Luckily, this didn't take too long because of the wind and the hot ground, so I wasn't sleeping in a puddle all night. The day after, we had a similar experience with clear skies and high temperatures during the day, but as the evening approached, we noticed the same storm in the distance. We were planning to sleep outside a park ranger's office, but thankfully and very generously, the park rangers ended up letting us sleep on the floor of the office to shelter from some more high winds, and this time hail that lasted a few hours. I'm not sure what we would have done if we were left outside, whether our tents would have survived these absolute ice bullets. It was really crazy to see how the weather could change in a few hours from 35-degree heat during the day to strong hail and cold rain as the storm came in the evening. The roads after this were really varied. They were either beautiful climbs with switchbacks through the mountain with panoramic views, or they were dead straight roads across the plains and the desert. We'd been on some pretty straight roads in Patagonia, but you can see on my Strava the past few weeks we've been cycling along roads without a kink for 70 or so kilometres. This time, however, compared to Patagonia, we were pretty lucky with wind, which we felt like we deserved. We quite often had a tailwind for these long straight sections. This meant that as a 3, we were absolutely flying along, gobbling up kilometres in our mini peloton. We also had our first sighting of a tarantula. We'd heard about tarantulas in the desert, but we hadn't actually seen one ourselves. And this one decided to accompany me with my morning ablutions. We've also seen a couple of scary looking snakes on the road, which means I've been extra observant before I pitch my tent now, looking out for anything with 8 legs, stingers, or anything that slithers. After a week or so of hot weather, we were hit by a really rare downfall of heavy rain. One of our favourite places to camp is at petrol stations in Argentina, specifically the YPF chain. We love these places because they've got everything we need. They've got showers, they've got a shop to buy food until late at night, running water, Wi-Fi, and they've even often got coffee machines for breakfast, so we often have a coffee and a croissant in the morning. So on one day we'd set up at the bottom of a field by one of these petrol stations in what we thought was a great spot, but at around 4 a.m, I realised that the ground was flooded, and thanks to some new holes in my tent that had appeared from the storm in the abandoned building a few days before, my tent had now siphoned up a few kilometres of water. This led to a sleepless night, made me very grumpy, and in the morning we attempted to use compressed air from the petrol station to try and dry our gear, but this wasn't too effective, and that day I had to carry a few more kilos of water that had been absorbed by my tent. It also made me think ahead to how well my tent is going to stand up to the rainy season in Bolivia, but
You're on live now. What do you think of the landscape here?
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
It's very much like Australia, don't you think?
Yeah, it reminds me back home. Back home, yeah. Couple of Ringo Dingoes in the old outback.
After this downfall of rain, it meant that a lot of the roads had now flooded. There are around 20 rivers or fords we had to cross without a bridge or anything. This was on the main road with varying depths. Some were cyclable, some we had to walk across, but others we noticed looked pretty deep. We could even hear boulders rolling along under the surface, which we didn't think would be too good for our ankles or our bikes. We had also heard earlier that morning from a local that a motorcyclist had been washed away and had to be rescued. So being careful, we ended up hitching a lift across with a local pickup. It was a really fun section though, and we were like little children stomping around in the mud in our SPD sandals. We're now having a few rest days in Cafayate, which is a beautiful town with views over the vineyards and mountains. Our plan is to relax, drink some Malbec, eat well, and rest up for the next section, which could be the most challenging yet. We should be crossing one of the highest roads in the southern hemisphere at around 5,000 meters. It's going to be gravel, which is especially hard as we've got quite thin tyres, and we're also unsure how our bodies will react to climbing at this elevation, as none of us have ever been that high before. It's also extremely remote, so we'll have to drag lots of water up with us. And hopefully in the next video that I make, I'll be able to give you a thorough update on how it went. Thanks for watching, and if you want to see any more, check out our blog and our Instagram.
I said fuck off, guys.